Textbooks talk about the melting pot of America, or how a multitude of cultures have come together and blended into the American people. That's true. Your ancestors could have come from any possible point on the globe, but when they became an American, they claimed Greek descent. More than 2,500 years ago, the ancient Greeks set forth all on the ideals that we hold so dearly: freedom of thought, freedom of speech, and freedom of expression. To the ancient world, nothing was a more shocking thought than freedom. Just a little more than 200 years ago, when the American colonies decided it was freedom they wanted above all else, it was still a shocking idea. If it weren't for the Greeks, would there have been a United States of America? Maybe not. Because the ancient Greeks were so successful in so many different areas, there must have been some key ingredient, some secret recipe for these astounding breakthroughs. Indeed there was, and it was relatively simple. The Greeks questioned everything. Without questioning, there is no learning, no progress. The Greeks were the first to grasp this concept. It's beyond our modern mindset to understand how ancient man was wired. He was designed to not question. Kings didn't want their subjects questioning their right to rule. Slave owners didn't want their slaves questioning what life would be like without slavery. Questioning was dangerous business. Even in Greece, the birthplace of constant questioning, too much questioning could get you into trouble. Socrates, the philosopher most famous for his questioning, was condemned to die. The charge? Corrupting the youth of Athens with the questioning plague. Yet, they couldn't help themselves. Those Greeks, they had to understand it all: life, war, politics, art, architecture, even the universe. Once they questioned the old ways, they thought of new ways. History is made when things change, and things change in ancient Greece. The rest of us have been merely riding on their coattails ever since. This period we were just discussing is known as Classical Greece, the time when all the movers and shakers in Greece got to moving and shaking. It all happened about 500 years before Christ showed up. But all of this sounds more like history when the subject of this book is supposed to be mythology. Hopefully, you're impressed by how intelligent, modern, and classy the classical Greeks were. I mean, anything with the word classical in it has to be highbrow, right? But the thought-provoking, chin-stroking, universe-questioning Greeks of classical Greece didn't write the myths we associate with Greek mythology. They came from an older time, a time in Greece that embarrassed most classy Greeks, a time when men weren't philosophers or scientists. Strong kings ruled the lands, not the people. Debates were settled by chariot and spear instead of rhetoric or persuasive speeches. Warriors, not thinking men, were the toast of Greece. Bards wandered the countryside, singing of mighty battles. These previous Greeks weren't as smart or sophisticated as the classical Greeks, but they could tell a good story. Some call their time the Dark Age of Greece. Not a flattering name. The classical Greeks will be remembered for their knowledge, and the Dark Age Greeks will be remembered for their sheer imagination. Their keeps have crumbled. Their army lie as bones and barrows. Their stories are all that are left of them. Words have endured. Words that come out of the past like voices from a cave. Greek myths, as in most cultures, originated orally, told or sung for the pleasure of the listener. In this form they managed to stay alive, passed from parent to child as the only heirloom of the previous generation. When the miracle of the written word arrived, the old oral tales were still there, fully developed, begging to be written down. Though the persevering power of writing, we still have them today. Although many things developed in Greece, one institution that failed was organized religion. The Greeks certainly had plenty of stories about gods. They even prayed to these gods. They had temples and oracles and offered sacrifices. What they lacked was a strict religious code. They had no 10 commandments, no set of scriptures, no dogma attached to their gods. There was nothing to tell them what to do, when to do it, or why they should do it. Because this code never developed, the Greeks weren't a terribly religious people. This would have been blasphemy anywhere else, but not in Greece. By the time the classical Greeks came on the scene, their ancient religion had been reduced to rituals, going through the motions. People were seriously starting to doubt the gods, flat out rejecting the old myths. The intellectual set started exploring new ways to get in touch with the universe. Their own people demoted the Greek myths from fact to fiction. But this didn't hurt their popularity any. In fact, it helped it in a way. Socrates and his student Plato, although they couldn't endorse the myths as true, developed a new use for them. In their eyes, the myths were still meaningful if people looked at them as metaphors. They were the science of the previous generation. Playwrights in Athens knew their usefulness as well. They used retelling of myths as their way of examining human nature, our behavior, the way we think. Even though myths were losing its credibility, Homer, the Dark Age chronicler of the Trojan War, was still revered as Greece's greatest poet. In fact, the Iliad, Homer's mythical account of the war at Troy, was the closest thing to a Bible that the Greeks had. Political and philosophical arguments could be settled by a quote from its passages. Achilles, Agamemnon, and Hector were the examples of manly excellence. In a story filled with gods and goddesses, the Greeks saw the human factor as the truly important one. The way the classical Greeks viewed their myths is not far off from how we will view them. We're not looking for gods, we're looking for men and metaphors. Something that represents something else, a comparison. We're not looking to understand the heavens, it would be enough to just understand ourselves. An accurate picture of ancient Greece. This book will use the term Greece to indicate the many city-states that once inhabited the region called Greece today. The sad truth is that from its earliest times until long after its classical period, a unified concept of Greece did not exist. Instead, it was every city-state for itself. As for city-states, the name almost says it all. They were cities, but also held the power of states. The leader or leaders of a city also ruled the regions outside that city walls. During the Greek Dark Age, kings and queens governed those areas. Later, when the idea of democracy prevailed, a council of elected elders ruled in some cities. In times of war, the countryside peasants would retreat behind the walls of the city for protection. The geographical layout of Greece, multiple mountain ranges surrounding plains, kept the city-states from easily interacting with one another. A city-state's culture often developed in different ways than its neighbor's culture, leading to mutual distrust and alienation. City-states spent most of their time warring with one another over land or other trivial matters. The thought of a unified country ever coming out of these squabbling states seemed impossible. Most of what we know about the ancient Greece city-states comes from classical Athens. When some people say classical Greece, they basically mean classical Athens. Athens set the cultural trend for the rest of the city-states, who simply adopted Athenian ideas and entertainments. The agora, a central marketplace where farmers and merchants sold their wares, was the lifeblood of this Greek city. Most cities would have had a citadel or keep reserved for their ruler at the height of the city. In classical Greece, most cities also had a gymnasium, a sports complex, spa/park combination, where male citizens could stay fit in case of war. Exercise and competition were done in the nude, so no women were allowed to participate. Wealthy boys were expected to be educated in all the latest learning. If they were especially privileged, They might become a student of the philosopher like Socrates or Plato. They were expected to be cultured young men, their days filled with studying Homer and composing their own poetry. Mastering the lyre, a small harp, also was a requirement of the Athenian gentleman. In Athens, keeping up with the latest political and philosophical ideas was a common pursuit and almost a full-time job. During the festival of Dionysus, citizens would crowd to the city theater where they could catch an all-day marathon of the latest dramas by Sophocles or Euripides. In spite of this intellectual atmosphere, women and slaves still held almost no rights. In the Dark Ages of Greece, the setting for all of our myths, the same Greek city-states existed but were not nearly as cultured. The only information about this time comes from the myths themselves. City-states were ruled by powerful kings who were at times barbaric and ruthless. Under their rule, not even males had any inherent rights. Bandits and beasts roamed the roads, and travel was dangerous. Although women enjoyed more freedom than they would in classical times, they were open to more risks as well. Rape was common. Men, women, and children could easily be kidnapped and sold into slavery. It was a hard life for almost everyone. In a way, the myths that emerged from this time were the Greeks' method of dealing with the untamed world around them.